Simcha, celebration, Simcha, Simcha, celebration of life.
Hi from me, Jared Epstein, and welcome to another episode of Simcha, a celebration of life. Stellenbosch University-based historian David Gross is studying the history of the dwindling Jewish communities of the Western Cape. Simcha caught up with David to learn more about these communities in Stellenbosch, Paarl, Worcester and Malmesbury.
I'm a Joburg Jew. I grew up in Joburg, I went to King David, and when I went to Stellenbosch University, I never thought that kind of my Jewish culture and heritage would follow me there. And then one day I'm walking on campus and there I pass this beautiful old synagogue with the Hebrew lettering above the door, and I found out that there is still, to this day, since 1901, there is still a Jewish community there. And obviously, as a historian, that immediately piqued my interest. I mean, this is a town that saw the likes of Krawitz and Forster, and yet at the exact same time, there was a thriving Jewish community. When the Jews came to South Africa from Europe, fleeing persecution, they would either settle in the big cities, such as Cape Town or Johannesburg, or, as in this case, they would settle in the small town. And what made them unique is each of these towns had a certain character. Stellenbosch had its university, Malmesbury was a small farming community, Worcester was far away from Cape Town so that it would be outside of the influence of Cape Town, and a place like Paarl was one of the largest Jewish communities in the countryside. The Jews would start off either as farmers or as smosers, small-town peddlers. And over time, those small-town peddlers would then turn into business owners. And over time, what you start to see, like Stellenbosch or even Paarl, Malmesbury, or Worcester, Jews started to become wealthier and started to own more and more businesses. So at the height of the community, a town like Stellenbosch, all three of the town's major hotels, the town's two major cinemas, and the main hardware store were all owned by Jewish families. Well, the Stellenbosch community is one of the most fascinating communities in the Cape because of the interactions between the Jews and the university, as well as the theology faculty. Now, Stellenbosch University itself was never a big place for Jewish students to go to, except in the early days in the 1920s, many Jews went to the local agricultural school, and they would then go on to actually become the first farmers in Israel. How my research was conducted is that I used Jewish sources, but my main focus was using local Afrikaans newspapers. And through that, I was able to gauge kind of the level of interaction that continued between Jews and non-Jews within town. And on appearances, the main members of a Jewish community are always the males, the rabbi, the heads of business. But what my research has also shown is that it was actually the women in the community, especially in terms of the Union of Jewish Women and their activities, that were the main conduit between the town and the Jewish community. So when I would go through the local newspapers, it wasn't the local rabbi or the local businessmen who were featured most prominently, it was the activities of Jewish women who would hold bake sales, braais, balls, charity concerts, all for Jews and non-Jews within their town. In terms of individuals in this town, I think the best story is about the Reverend Pachter, who was the Reverend in the 1950s. And he had many interactions with the local community. He himself spoke fluent Afrikaans, and what I loved reading was that in many of his interactions with the town, he would address his congregation and visitors not in his biblical Hebrew or in the Yiddish or English that he spoke at home, but instead in Afrikaans. In terms of interactions between Jews and the non-Afrikaans part of towns, that's a lot harder to gauge because there's obviously a lot less written about that. One of the most interesting stories I came across, though, was the story of Mr. Jacques, a farmer in 1947. In his will, he left over £3,500 towards the coloured population of Stellenbosch, including a benevolent fund, a bursary, and an orphanage. And it's very interesting today that over 72 years later, a fund left by a Jewish farmer in Stellenbosch is still helping coloured children go to university in Cape Town. Stellenbosch itself did not experience anti-Semitism on the same scale as perhaps the other towns, such as Paarl, where it was quite rampant, where there were many publications, anti-Jewish publications that were released during the 1930s. In Stellenbosch itself, what came to my attention was that there were actually a number of interactions between the town council and the local Jewish community, in which the town council kept on reassuring the local Jews that they were safe and that anti-Semitism wouldn't be allowed within their town, which is something very unique for Stellenbosch itself. One of the saddest things about these former communities is that when you visit them, you would never know that in these small towns there was a huge Jewish population. They would, in the great Jewish tradition, they would want the best for their children. And what that often would end up meaning was that if they could afford it, they would start sending their children to the better schools. That would mean sending their children to schools in Cape Town, where they would be taught in English. And over time, what you found is as the children began to grow up, they never returned. And so as the first and second generations grew older, they would eventually pack up and leave, sell their businesses, and go either to live in the big cities or overseas to join their children. Of the 4 Jewish communities, only Paarl and Stellenbosch still actually exist as a functioning congregation, although every year there are less and less members, and that the final end of these communities is fast approaching. In terms of Malmesbury and Worcester, Malmesbury Synagogue is now a museum, and Worcester's synagogue is completely decommissioned.
Jewish photographer Tony Raphaely compiled and recently launched a book called Jewish Cape Town 5779, A Handful of Sand. The book features images of the Cape Town Jewish community taken by him and various other photographers. The book was launched at the South African Jewish Museum, and Simcha was there.
Cape Townians and visitors, welcome and thank you very much for coming to this launch this evening.
This is a particularly interesting project if you think it through. I suppose it's always a guarantee to have a good crowd in at a book launch when you photograph most of the people. I'm pretty much assured that they're going to come. But what is particularly intriguing about this book, if I may, are 2 or 3 features. In the first place, I asked Tony, why do this? Why photograph these marvelous photographs about various Cape Townians? And his answer to me...
About a year ago, a little bit over now, I was in London and went to a Vishniac exhibition. And it reminded me of Vishniac's book, A Vanished World, which, as you probably know, consists of photographs that he took in the 1920s and 30s in Eastern Europe. He didn't know, of course, about the Holocaust, but he knew that the days of Jewish communities in Central Europe, as they had been living, were over. And that got me thinking that, that Cape Town actually perhaps needed a book like that. And then I was in Cairo, and I went to the synagogue where the Genezer is, and I said to the beadle there, how many Jews are left in Cairo? And he said, about 40. And I said, and 70 years ago? Oh, 70 years ago, he said, there were 25,000. When I grew up in Cape Town, there were 25,000 Jews here. Now there are about half. So maybe in 100 or 200 years' time, there'll be 40. And so I thought it would be a good idea to capture the Jewish community in Cape Town as it existed in the last Jewish year, 5779, and like so many tasks one sets out on, one has no idea what is involved. For example, I thought I would take the pictures. I soon realized that was not possible. And in the end, we used 17 professional photographers. And the 290 odd pictures were chosen from over 3,000.
I thought it was a lovely idea. I obviously didn't think it was going to be so big. Originally, it would have been more buildings, synagogues and such, and a few people. And it actually grew into quite a big project with a big print run of quite a diverse group of people.
I wanted it to be a coffee table book. And that is what, in fact, we were able to produce. If you look in the book, you'll see that that under each picture, there's just the name of the individual, individuals in the image, and what they do. We did think at one stage about having a little write-up about the people in the pictures, but that then would become quite cumbersome because some of the professors would have lengthy write-ups, and some of the people who are less academically inclined would have much less. So we ended up with just the names and what they do. And each picture, as you will see, is in context. So the surgeon is in his operating theatre, and the tree fella has just chopped down a tree, and the Kirstenbosch guide is in Kirstenbosch, and so on.
The picture is very special to me because those girls are from the Kensington Creche, a union of Jewish women creche in Kensington, and it was formed in 1942. So it's one of the most wonderful sustainable projects, and we cater for the Jewish community and the broader community.
I knew a few of the people in Cape Town because even though I left here just after my bar mitzvah a long time ago, we do come back every year for a few weeks, and we have friends here, and it's really a small community. So asking around, and a photographer we used, Guy Lerner, one of the photographers, had wonderful connections into both the secular and the religious communities. So between the two of us and our friends, we found a lot of people.
And it's been wonderful to be part of this process from the side. I mean, this was Tony and his project, but I had a small little glimpse from the side, giving a little bit of input from the Israeli side. And I'm Cape Townian born. I'm very proud of the city, and it was wonderful to be together with Tony in a little way to be part of this magnificent project.
They say a picture tells 1,000 words, and I think that his book, which consists of hundreds of pictures, probably tells 1,000,000 words. It's quite remarkable in what it does. I think that in generations to come, they'll be able to look back and say, this was how life was. I think one day the people will look at the book almost as a walking museum, because it too will capture the life of a wonderful city at a particular and interesting time in its history.
As viewers of the book will see, all the pictures are current. There aren't any archive pictures. So they were all taken in the Jewish year 5779, because archive pictures are very important, but this isn't the book for them. This is a book for a snapshot in time of the Jewish community in Cape Town.
I can't believe that I'm in it. I think it's a great privilege. The book, in a sense, has changed my life, in that it's given me a lot more awareness and insight into the people of Cape Town, who all play a different role in different ways of life. There was no discrimination, no favors. It had nothing to do with status or wealth or degrees or background. It was ordinary people in working professions.
And that's what this particular book does. It embraces the concept of community. I was absolutely delighted when I saw these photographs. Some of the people I don't know, and I've lived here almost my entire life. I mean, of course, I do know some people like Mr. Hodis, who afflicts us on a daily basis in court. But in all seriousness, if you look at this book, it's not a book which essentially, in which Tony went and said to himself, who's got status in this community, and those are the people that I'm going to photograph. And Tony, you've done us an unbelievable favor, because what you've done in this book is to affirm what we really are, which is that we have an empathy whereby we actually regard each other with dignity, with care, and with concern. And we look at ourselves and we look at this book and we're proud to say we are part of a vibrant community. And yes, in 100 years' time, when people look at this book, they'll say, wow, there was a community. And hopefully there still will be a community of Jews who, in a sense, hold their Jewish identity as very important, but do it in their own individual ways and have sufficient empathy to respect the manner in which other people hold their identities important to them. I really wish to congratulate you on a quite remarkable contribution to the history of our community. Thank you.
The Cape SA Jewish Board of Deputies and Temple Israel in Cape Town recently hosted an interfaith concert in Greenpoint to mark United Nations Interfaith Harmony Week. The event was attended by participants from diverse religious backgrounds, and Simcha was there too.
We first heard about United Nations World Interfaith Harmony Week, which was proposed by the King of Jordan into the United Nations. It was unanimously agreed on. South Africa, for peculiar region, has never ever commemorated it. The Jewish Board of Deputies thought this is a good idea to do something to bring the communities together. So since 2012, I've been organizing a United Nations Interfaith Harmony Week.
Tonight we come together in prayer and song, both actions of hope and longing and a belief that things can be better. At the Jewish Board of Deputies, we too believe that things can be better for ourselves, for our communities, for the wider community, for South Africa, and indeed for the world.
I wish I was a little bit more musical and could sing you something, but I can promise you, you would not want to hear that. But let me just start with a quote from the book of Proverbs. Deceit is in the heart of those who plot evil, but those who promote peace have joy.
The song is basically speaking about the realities within the DRC, is that it's the richest country in Africa with regards to resources, but its people do not reap the benefits of those resources. And she's basically portraying herself to be Congo, saying that she's a beautiful woman that the whole world wants to abuse, wants to rape, wants to take advantage of because of her beauty and nothing else. And she's crying out saying, what will the world do now that they know my reality? Will they just keep allowing it to happen?
I'm crying, set me free. I wanna lead, I wanna give
love. I bring you greetings from the Muslim community. We ask God the Almighty to send us His peace and harmony so that we can live with understanding of one another and live in peace and harmony without any hatred. May God the Almighty accept. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Thanks to the Almighty Lord of the universe.
It's important because we are one. The word unity, it's something that needs to happen, but one means one. The Great Spirit created us one, so we need to understand that we are one indeed.
It's so important to me that we were able to host this event this evening. So many of the faith leaders spoke about peace. In Hebrew, the word shalom, like the Imam spoke about salam, the root of shalom is shleimut, to be whole. And we can't be whole if we are alone. We need to be whole because we're in partnership, we're in collaboration with the people around us in our community. And tonight it felt like the whole community of Cape Town was there in the true spirit of what interfaith harmony must mean. And it was important for us that we could host that, to bring those communities together here. That's exactly what Temple Israel is about.
Interfaith is important because if we can't understand each other, then we can't achieve things together. We can't achieve peace, we can't achieve change, we can't end poverty or any of the things that we need to do to repair the world. The first step is to understand each other.
So often we hear dark stories, and in this country we live with the lights off more than we live with the lights on. And I think sometimes we carry that also into our own personal spaces and our hearts. We look for the negative rather than the positive. And how easy it is to switch on the light by listening to powerful poems by young members of our community, to listening to song of hope, of opportunity from our youngsters in our community. And that's a constant reminder to us all that sometimes if you choose to turn the light on rather than turning the light off, what opportunity and hope there is for all of us in this great country called South Africa.
Well, that's all we have for this week's episode of Simcha, a celebration of life. As always, we'd love to hear from you, so please send us a Facebook message at Spirit Sister Productions. From me, Jared Epstein, and the Simcha team, remember, we are not makers of history, we are made by history.